Welcome to this episode of the Consultancy Edge. I'm your host, Matt Hodkinson, and today I'm speaking with Deri Hughes of Honeycomb Consulting Skills Training. Yes, we cover the importance of building your capabilities and sharpening that saw of your skills and your people inside your consultancy. We also talk about Deri's fascinating journey through consultancy from those early days at Bain through the boutique consulting world and into his own venture. And we also cover that incredibly important topic of marrying up business life with family life as well. I really think that you're going to warm to Deri during this episode. We had a fantastic chat and I can't wait to share this with you. Deri Hughes, welcome to the Consultancy Edge.
Thank you, Matt. Great to be here. Great to see you.
Wonderful. Now we've obviously known each other for a little while now, and I've got a really good sense of what you're about. Your amazing journey in the world of consulting. For those who haven't had the pleasure, tell us your story about when you first started way back in the day with one of the big boys and everything you're doing now.
Yeah, sure. So, I started in consulting back in 2006. I joined Bain Company as an associate consultant. I actually came off the back of doing a PhD in organic chemistry. So I'd been at uni for 8 years basically by that point. And my PhD supervisor had started a couple of businesses, which caught my eye a bit. I was like, what's this whole business world all about? Partly because he merged his first two businesses and then floated them on AIM for about 300 million, which is a number that catches your eye when you've been living on £8,000 a year of a PhD stipend, I can tell you. And not that I'm actually very money oriented these days, but it certainly caught my eye back then. So I joined Bain Company as an associate consultant, spent 6 years there, mostly focused around consumer products and private equity consulting. I left Bain just before my first kid was born, partly because I couldn't see that lifestyle fitting with the type of father that I wanted to be honest. So then I was an independent consultant for several years. I then joined up with a boutique consulting firm about 8 years ago called Credo Business Consulting, which we then sold to Teneo. So that's now Teneo Consulting. Mm-hmm. And then 6 years ago, I founded Honeycomb Consulting Skills Training, which is my business that works with boutique consulting firms, advises them on talent development, delivers training. So I'm in the privileged position of working with boutique consulting firms all over the country, across Europe, to help them develop their teams, develop their people, which is a fantastic privileged position to be in.
Wonderful. And I do want to explore that in a lot more detail, because I think that's a lot of the appeal of that. I don't see anybody else really honing in on that real competency skills aspect. But one of the things I want to tap into that you just mentioned around that lifestyle aspect and whether it is damaging to family life by default or by design, to be part of that big machine. I mean, obviously you mentioned your time at Bain there. Did it fit with your time of life at that particular point, new priorities in your life? Talk about that a little bit, if you wouldn't mind. I mean, how do you feel that is now handled? Have things improved, or do you still see there's issues with that?
It's an interesting one. I think the world we work in these days makes it a lot easier because there's much more of an acceptable level of virtual working and hybrid working and remote working. Yeah. So I see a lot of people are able to manage that juggle better. Back then, the idea of having video calls was completely alien. We'd have conference calls, but nobody would ever be getting on camera and talking to each other. Obviously, COVID changed that a huge amount for a lot of different firms. I was working very long hours and I was traveling a lot. And my first 8 months of married life, I spent more nights away from home than I did at home. And that just wasn't the type of father that I wanted to be. And now I've got 4 young children now, so the workload at home is significant, to say the least. So I think it is more possible now. I do think for every consultant out there, whether you're in one of the big firms or in a smaller firm, you've got to take some personal responsibility for maintaining your own boundaries and managing your own resilience. And resilience is to extent it's inherent in all of us, but there's a lot of ways that you can train yourself to be more resilient and get yourself a toolkit to be more resilient. And I think that's something that consultants still need. It's always going to be a demanding job. We are by definition taking talented and therefore expensive people and selling them to clients at a multiple of their already expensive cost. So clients are spending a lot of money to tap into the capability of teams out there, and that brings its pressures with it. And if you're a McKinsey, Bain, BCG manager, you're generally walking into a client situation representing hundreds of thousands of pounds a month of spend, and clients put some pressure on you because of that. So particularly at that kind of manager principal level, it's a really demanding place to be, I think. So it is more possible now than it was, but I still think if you're gonna be the parent you want to be or have real big interests outside of work,
Mm.
you've got to work very actively to maintain your lifestyle, maintain your boundaries around that. And some firms won't necessarily accept that. In which case, I
Yeah.
just say to people, find a different firm. There's plenty out there.
Yeah, sadly, I guess there will be some of those. And the reason I wanted to tap into that, because I know a great many consultancy leaders are having to blend, work and life, as we all do, different lifestyles. A lot will be parents, a lot will resonate with what you've just said. And yet, especially during what have been, challenging times for many consultancies, there is this need to well need it's not really a need, I guess, it's a requirement to compromise sometimes to keep everybody happy into the bargain. um I want to tap into that resilience word as well, Derry, because I think that is a hugely important skill. You talk about competencies within consultancies and obviously building on those skills. How much are you seeing that resilience is something that people are looking to nurture in their people, embed it in their teams, and make something that is just again a non-negotiable, something that happens by default?
Do you know what? The resilience theme is a really interesting one because it's cropped up multiple times over the year. In fact, the very first, so when I started Honeycomb, we weren't fully focused on training. We were supporting boutique consulting firms with a whole bunch of outsourced services in different ways. And the reason we pivoted into training was because our clients were saying to us, "What can you recommend a training provider for X?" And there was nobody out there. It still blows my mind how few competitors we have that are specialists in this area. Quite happy with that situation, but it surprises me. And one of the very first courses that I wrote was building resilience as a consultant, which was my toolkit I'd taken from being a manager at Bain Company and managing my own resilience at that time. And we trained about 75 people through that course initially. What I've observed over the years is resilience keeps cropping up as a theme, but the sense I get for a lot of firms is they would like their people to be more resilient, but they don't really like it when those people come off a resilience training and say, in order to manage my own mental health and my own stress levels, I'm going to put some boundaries in place around work-life balance and availability and responsiveness and having an evening a week where I go and do something. And if that is already not part of the culture in an organization, it's very difficult for that individual to impose their own requirements. So what I now say to people when they're talking about we need our team to be more resilient, we have to look at the culture of the business, the way that the leadership team are role modeling themselves, and are they actually making it possible for people to hold boundaries in a way that they need to. Lots of firms are doing that well. There's lots of firms I work with where they have people in the senior leadership team who are working 3 days a week, 4 days a week, whether or not they've got children. And I'm a strong believer in if somebody wants to work part time, you don't have the right to just to ask why they want to work part time and decide whether it's a valid reason. I think if someone has a reason for working part time, they should be able to make that request, and most consulting firms should be able to make that work. So we have firms that do make it work. We have other firms where they really struggle with the idea of people holding boundaries. And I guess the other side that I do see is people who go into consulting thinking that their mental health should take precedent over everything else and their own stress should take precedent over everything else, and forgetting that ultimately it's a client service business.
Yeah.
And this is the enduring balancing act that people are having to walk is you can't always just say, I need to take a break, because ultimately what that means is clients will stop working with you, you'll stop having revenue, and you won't have a job.
Mm.
So there is that commercial reality that is lacking sometimes as well. So
I
it's a
think
balancing act, but it continues to be an important theme for most firms we speak to.
yeah, it absolutely should be. I think the thing to reflect on there, from my own experience and perspective, is that it's about setting the right expectations with the client as well, and sourcing those sort of client relationships. I know a lot of consultancies, for example, are targeting companies that have an ethical, moral, sustainability angle. They're more likely to align with some of those values that are inherent in a modern consultancy where resilience, well-being, mental and otherwise, is part of the sort of fabric of that organization. So I guess it's
Yeah.
about expectation setting, putting out more of what you want to attract in as well.
Yeah, I certainly find my clients that work primarily with private equity firms, for example, really struggle with that client management piece. So I vividly remember someone saying to me who's an FDD consultant at KPMG, and him saying, my private equity clients fundamentally struggle with the idea of holiday for advisors. So he was due to be going on holiday midway through a fairly lengthy deal process, and it was just beyond the realms of possibility that he would actually not be having to work with his clients while he was on holiday. So pick your clients carefully is one of the answers there. It's one of the reasons I like working with boutique firms, because generally speaking, one of the ways that they differentiate from an employee value proposition is that they can offer people more flexibility, better work-life balance, and also faster progression. And they kind of get that they don't have the brand name to fall back on. They don't necessarily have the client list to fall back on, although most of them have pretty good clients. But what they can really offer is a familial atmosphere and culture where they're working, where people genuinely know each other and care about each other.
I want to touch on what your early journey into consulting looked like. I mean, you mentioned a little bit there, Deri, about obviously the opportunistic aspect of that, getting out of the PhD stipend into something a bit better paid. But what has kept you in the world of consulting? Because you could say you were on a trajectory to become the world's next big chemist. What kept you in the world of consulting? Did you find it addictive? Did you find it just so attractive at the expense of everything else? What was it for you?
Yeah, one thing I would say, I was certainly not on a trajectory to be the world's best chemist, and actually, there's an interesting learning there for me. So during my PhD, I was kind of interested in the chemistry. I wasn't a very good chemist by any stretch of the imagination, and I really didn't love it to the extent that some of my peers loved it. To an extreme extent. I mean, there were people who were genuinely spending 16 hours a day, 7 days a week in the lab because they were so enthralled by it that that's all they wanted to do. And I had this realization that I'm never going to be as passionate or as capable as those people. So that's not it's not my playground. It's not where I'm going to like make my mark. Moving into consulting, one of the big reasons I've stayed in consulting is I it doesn't naturally fit with the attributes that I have. I've got a very structured brain in Simon Baron Cohen terms, where he has a book called The Pattern Seekers. He categorizes brains as systematizers or empathizers, and I am an extreme type S on the systematizing end of the spectrum. It's interesting because my wife is an extreme type E, so how the hell we communicate, I've got no idea. But I'm highly structured and systematizing, but I've also got an ability to build relationships and connect with people and to tell stories and to convince people to do things. So consulting just works for me. As one of the partners at Bain said when I was thinking about leaving Bain after a couple of years to go and join a small hedge fund, he said, "Don't leave. Like, this is square peg, square hole. Like, you are good at consulting." So that's one of the reasons I stayed. The other reason is I love the variety of it, and I love the ability to have impact, which is again one of the reasons I really enjoy working with small firms. And even prior to Honeycomb, I was more and more working as an independent consultant with smaller firms, because the idea that you can get access to the real decision makers and they just have the freedom to make stuff happen is the impact you get from that is just phenomenal. So you get this outsized ability to impact organizations that you work with in a way that it's quite difficult from the inside, in my experience.
I think there are a number of consultancies still that would accept there's a challenge in measuring that impact. And a great many we've worked with and spoken with just haven't put enough emphasis on checking back with clients after engagements, and especially where it's kind of either a once and done or a fixed term, to see exactly what was the impact of the work that we did together. And with a view to always looking for that edge, Deri, what would be your advice to consultancies that perhaps haven't built that into their culture and are struggling to capture the impact of what they've done, either be it for case studies, testimonials, that just that
Yeah.
general social proof?
I mean, case studies and testimonials for me is a non-negotiable if you're trying to market your consultancy these days. And I mean, many consulting firms are pretty poor at marketing, as I'm sure you've identified. For me, getting to those testimonials is really important, but actually what you really want to get to is a genuine understanding of which bits of your guidance are working and why they're working. And so and this is one of the things that we're trying to do internally more and more with our clients, is to really understand not just the output metrics that you're trying to influence, but all the steps that lead up to those output metrics, starting with the individual person that you're trying to get to change their behavior in some way. So there is no consulting project has any value unless someone does something different as a result of the work that you're doing. If nothing changes, then you're wasting your time. So you want someone to do something different, and that behavior change is going to then have impact on them as an individual. How are they feeling about making that change? Does it sit comfortably with them? Are they blocked from doing it consistently for some reason? It's going to have an impact on their peer group around them. How are they feeling about observing this new behavior? How is it impacting them and the choices that they're making? And ultimately, those ripple effects spread out, and you can start to then tap into the subtle leading indicators that are starting to change. So if you take something like a consulting engagement where you're trying to drive new sales behaviors, for example, relatively easy example, but a lot of people, particularly in the consulting space, have a fear of sales. So the first thing you've got to get over is this block that they have about actually putting themselves out there, talking about themselves on LinkedIn, approaching a client, initiating a conversation about a new potential project. Get them over that hurdle and see how it sits with them, and are they able to change it? And then you can start to look at, if they're doing that consistently, well, what impact is that having in terms of the number of leads they're generating, the size of those leads, the speed they're moving through the pipeline, and ultimately revenue. And for any given consulting intervention, you can identify a series of things that should change as a result of that intervention, and that you can in some way measure. Even if it's just observational feedback from clients, relatively qualitative, that's still better than not measuring it at all. And so I'd strongly encourage firms to think about that up front. Like, what are we going to be able to measure as a result of this? What data can we gather that is already, what data can we interrogate that is already being gathered, so we're not having to set up a whole new data gathering process around it? And if you can take all of that and deliberately start to measure it, you're going to get a couple of really big things out of that. One, you're going to get rock solid case studies that draw a link from the money and the effort put into your consulting project back to the value you've delivered. And two, you're going to actually know how you delivered that value. So you can then refine your processes and drop all the stuff that isn't working and double down on the stuff that is. So over time, if you invest in doing that, I see that massive benefit from it. It's certainly something that we're working really hard on being able to do for all of our interventions.
I love that. I love that. And just reflecting on, I mean, way back when in my consulting journey, I obviously worked in that quality assurance and testing space, very technical, but the process was very similar to that of capturing that social proof around hypothesizing, agreeing the success criteria, executing on the plan, measuring the results, and then redirecting that impact, pivoting to where your efforts need to go based on that information that's coming in. And I think that's something that we sometimes forget, is that any aspect of consulting and business in general typically requires that iterative approach. It's always cyclical, it's always moving, and ideally it's like a flywheel. It's gathering momentum into the bargain, the results are being generated, the impact is growing as well.
Yeah.
We do paint this picture of success, and I think we are guilty sometimes on this particular podcast of talking about the successes, the edge, the wins, and everything. I want to touch on Deri. We've also heard from a great many consultancies that have struggled in recent times, whether they've had to contract. I've heard of associates getting poached. I've heard of clients obviously taking longer decisions and even ditching particular contracts early. For those that have experienced those sorts of challenges, can you speak to a time perhaps where you sailed a bit close to the wind yourself? Perhaps times weren't as rosy, but you kept on going and pushing through that. We've obviously experienced a lot of turmoil in recent years. What was it for you?
So the lowest point with Honeycomb that I had was in the very early days. We were probably about a year and a half old, and we'd started to get some traction. We had a decent client list. My pipeline was starting to fill. We were getting positive signs, etc. And I made the classic rookie error of trying to go too fast, too soon, growing the team too quickly, and being overconfident in the people that I'd hired. And so we very quickly went from just me to a team of 7 people, hiring in line with client demand, and then very quickly realized that client demand wasn't anywhere near as sticky as I thought it was. The people that I'd hired, I was stretched way too thin, so I didn't have enough time to spend with them to get them up the learning ladder. There were a couple where I just hired the wrong person, partly because I was rushing to try and hire people in line with client demand rather than being patient. And we had a 6-month period where we made the total profit the business made was £12,000 over that 6 months. Now, we didn't make a loss, but we more or less broke even. And this is the business that my family lives off. At that point in time, I was the sole breadwinner. My twins were about 18 months old, maybe 2 years. They turned 2 in this window, actually. So my kids were kind of 2, 4, and 6 at the time. So the pressure on that was just immense, and it was a real learning experience as a business owner to look at the set of decisions I'd made and say, we are heading in the wrong direction here. I need to retrench. So I had to size the team back down again, a lot of painful conversations. And then COVID hit pretty soon after that as well. So it was just a whole bunch of turmoil at the time, worrying about cash reserves, burning through money. But I knew that I didn't want to do anything else. I knew that there was still enough demand there. There was still enough requirement and need for this out in the market. And the idea of having to give it all up and go and get an employed job somewhere I just did not want to do that, and couldn't see how that would meet my broader goals of being in line with my kind of mission of how I want to show up in the world and the type of husband and father I want to be. And so we found a way through it. We retrenched, we got back to sustainable profitability, found another couple of clients, and started to build a new path out of there. And that was the origins really of our pivot into being more of a training focused business following client demand. Nice. But it was hairy for a time. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll bet. And thank you for sharing that. I think a lot of people, myself included, will sympathize and resonate with that. I think a lot of us have been in that situation where we've had to pull back from a situation. It happens to the big boys. Obviously, we've heard of McKinsey earlier this year and last year, having to retract back from a position through overhiring and not necessarily handling it as well as you clearly did as well.
But, well, I think Bain in India just had to let go of a quarter of their workforce because they lost one client.
Wow.
They were over concentrated, and yeah, it's nobody's immune to these decisions, I think, because it's very hard to say no to a potential opportunity because of the downside risk of it not coming through.
And as you say, in that boutique consultancy where you are the breadwinner, that business success equals success in life, and it's just your ability to put food on the table, then it's even further amplified. But let's switch the energy up a bit. Tell me about a time when things were particularly great, a particular win, and the drivers behind that event in your working life.
Yeah, sure. I mean, um, I would say I'm right in the thick of it right now. Like I really feel like we're at an inflection point, and I think what has got us to this point is two main things I give it credit to. One is that we have found essentially product market fit. So we have a proposition now which is clear, easy to understand, and there's clear demand for it out there in the market. And the other side is that what I've really understood is the compounding effect of doing something consistently for a long period of time.
Mm.
And in particularly in this modern world that we operate in, that compounding effect means that you become known for that thing. And I'm very active on LinkedIn, so I've become very known for what we do on LinkedIn. And that's leading to just inbound inquiries and revenue growth that we are not doing any proactive outreach at all, and we've got more work than we can handle at the moment. And particularly the big win is we are getting inbound from huge global firms now to work with their senior leadership teams to help them run major skill development programs. And those inbounds are just coming cold through LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And so I really feel we've hit this inflection point just by being able to refine what we do down to a level of precision, be known for that thing, and talk about it consistently over a number of years. And we've got much, much better at our marketing. We've got much, much better at our sales calls. We've got a much fuller suite of delivery methodologies and tools, etc. So we're more credible when we get into those conversations. But the thing that I really encourage people to think about is the compounding effect of just doing something consistently, and it gets easier and easier and easier over time, is what we're finding.
Yeah, I want to speak about LinkedIn because I know you're a particularly good exponent of this. We had an earlier episode of the Consultancy Edge with Colleen McKenna, who's a LinkedIn expert. If you haven't listened to that and you're listening to this, then check back, of course. But Deri, without oversharing, giving away any kind of secret sauce, what have you found to be some of your most effective techniques on LinkedIn to connect with great partners, clients, prospects?
The main thing for me is a mindset thing about being generous, and I talk about it as an abundance mindset. But as far as I'm concerned, there is ample space and ample value out there in the world if you give away a load of your information, and that just trying to be helpful, getting in the mindset of I'm going on LinkedIn to be helpful to the people I want to help. And if you can do that with the confidence that, yeah, it'll flow back over time, but it doesn't have to directly flow back. And I speak to some people who say, oh, I don't want to take the time to post anything on LinkedIn unless I'm going to get a lead from it. And that for me is just, well, one, it's an unrealistic expectation, and two, it's back to front thinking around it. So that kind of mindset of just being generous to start with. And then the real blocker that a lot of people struggle with is just the time. Well, sorry, two blockers people have: the time and the fear. So we talk to a lot of consultants who are just scared of putting themselves out there on LinkedIn. And I, again, just encourage them, put something out there, and your worst case scenario is nobody engages with it and the algorithm buries it and nobody sees it anyway. So what are you scared about? And if you write something that people engage with, then as long as you haven't written something that makes you look like a total idiot, then great. I mean, that's the whole purpose of it, right? You get people talking about the topic that you're interested in. And if you post with a view to providing value to people, you're not going to get negativity from it. And then the time thing is just about using every tool out there to distill the bit that you do down to the absolute core of the value that you're offering. And so that means AI to help you write. I'll come back to that in a sec.
Mm-hmm.
It means scheduling tools, and it means planning your diary to do things systematically. And the big, do not and I can't say this strongly enough for anyone listening to you, do not use AI to write your posts. The original thinking has to come from you. Use AI to craft it, to turn it into a LinkedIn worthy post, what have you, but don't use AI to come up with the ideas. And so the way that we do it is, if I've got something I want to write a newsletter about, for example, I will record it for 15 minutes talking into my phone, into an AI note taker. That transcript then gets kicked over to marketing people. They craft it into a series of a newsletter and some LinkedIn posts, and then they schedule it.
Yeah.
And generally speaking, that's the input that I have to put in for 3 or 4 pieces of content. If you don't have the marketing person, then you can use AI to help you with that, or maybe it takes you a little bit longer. But if
Yeah.
you use those tools effectively, you can really get past the time barrier that an awful lot of people struggle with.
Yeah, I'm in a privileged position of having a marketing exec who interviews me once a month and comes up with a bunch of questions on the topic of the month. And I just spout my thoughts. They get recorded, they get transcribed, they get spun into lots of different content and responses to things that are being shared on LinkedIn. I know not everybody's got that, but as you said, Derry, you can ask ChatGPT or Copilot to interview you, to ask
Yeah.
the questions and just record yourself, responding back and then feed it in. And one of the things I did was create a GPT, which I call Matt 2.0. And I've fed it my book, I've fed it a bunch of videos and calls that I've had with prospects and clients and what have you. And it's distilling all of my thoughts into this engine to then just speak a little bit more with my voice, my thoughts, my experience, and just, bring that influence. But even then, I would never be posting verbatim what AI is spitting out, even when it's got all of that knowledge behind it. So I think that's really, really good.
I would say, Matt, for you and I, we do that because there is no alternative, because we're running our own businesses.
Yeah.
And if we don't win clients and get revenue, we're doomed.
Yeah.
For someone working in a consulting firm as a consultant, if you've got any desire to be in the industry medium term, starting to build up the habit around this and build up your credibility and your visibility online is going to make it so much easier when you're sat in a meeting as a partner with a revenue target.
Yeah.
Or when you start being told you've got to get sales in, because it will come if you stay in this industry. And then if you're listening to this from a more of a in-house or a firm owner or a firm leader perspective, you've got so much knowledge in the team that you're leading. Enable them to get that knowledge out into the market. And we've both just given you ways of doing that takes 15, 20 minutes a week.
Yeah.
So that investment must be worth it. And if you can do that and have a marketing executive who's working across 5, 10, 15 senior people in your firm, the return's enormous. So I just think there's no excuse these days for not doing it. And the benefits are just huge if you put yourself out there consistently.
Yeah. And you're absolutely
compounds
right.
over time.
Do without expectation, but the results will come. I mean, we've seen that countless times. Derry, well, you mentioned AI in there, of course. Be remiss of me not to jump on that. I was going to ask you about what key trends that you're observing in the consulting sector right now. It doesn't have to be AI, because a lot of people are talking about that right now. But what are some of the things that you think consultancies now and consultancy leaders need to be aware of?
Yeah, I mean, AI is obviously a hot topic. I actually think most firms are not yet ready to fully adopt AI. There's quite a lot that are experimenting with it, but the workflow changes that are necessary and the cultural change that is necessary is proving to be quite a barrier for a lot of firms. I think the macro trend that I'm really positive about is the growth of boutique firms, and even the growth of specialist independents. And I just see that increasing at a rate of knots, because as a individual consultant that then grows a firm behind them, your ability to be a specialist in a really tight niche, but also to become known as that specialist, is much higher than it's ever been before. And so that's one of the trends that I really see. So the bigger firms, I think, will increasingly just pick up the multi-country, global, really big, complex, high-scale initiatives, and more the small firms are going to win the bits where specialist knowledge is necessary. I think what we're going to see on top of that is a real move towards collaboration with those firms, and even collaboration between independent specialists, because the tools, the tech that we now have available to enable that collaboration is better than it's ever been before. And yes, AI will be part of that, and AI will allow individuals to scale their knowledge at a rate of knots. But what I'm really excited about is the depth of specialism, the depth of expertise, and then individual bits of expertise being combined into something that works really well for people. And we're going to need new business models to enable that. We're going to need new standards of collaborating that get beyond just I'll give you a 10% revenue share, or come and work with me on this project and I'll pay you a day rate. We're going to need other ways that work. But I think if we can crack those other new ways of working, then these collaborative units of specialists are going to be really thriving, I think, over the next 5-10 years, if we can get that right.
I completely agree. And I, in fact, had a guest article of my own published in Consultancy UK this week, talking about how boutiques, I feel, are going to usurp the big boys in many projects because of that valued specialism that they bring. I wonder, if we are going to be those specialists, Deri, what does that mean for potential strategic partnerships? Because I think that's the other opportunity, when there is that specialism, to buddy up on particular projects where there isn't perhaps the need for the big overarching, big four consultancy perhaps, but there's a subset of real specific skills. Have you been able to make partnerships work? How does it form part of the kind of Honeycomb outlook? And when have you seen it work, and how?
Yeah, we've made it work in a couple of different domains. So for example, we one of our training products, as it were, is around storytelling, and we do that in a very consulting way. We talk about pyramid principle, we talk about narrative-led stories, like writing a really strong key messages page and how you structure a deck to support that in a way that doesn't overwhelm people with way too much PowerPoint. Hopefully, one of the big trends we'll see is less PowerPoint, by the way. What we don't do, what we don't have the in-house knowledge around, is the technical grammar around writing, the way that a journalist might write or an author might write. And so we partner with an organization called Emphasis that are specialists in business writing. And in fact, just this week, they've delivered a 3-hour workshop for one of our core clients, where we run all of their L&D program and we do most of their training ourselves. But in this context, we needed a specialist in there.
Yeah.
And we jointly pitch quite frequently with them. Similarly, where we're talking about really senior board level communication, we partner with an organization that is specialist in working with boards. We partner with organizations that are recruitment specialists, for example. So we make that work. Often, I think true joint propositions are quite difficult to get to. So the way that we have accessed that is very much on a opportunity by opportunity basis. Start working together, check you've got cultural fit, check that you can trust each other, check that the other party are doing work in the way that you want them, to the quality that you need them to, and all of that side of things. And then over time, that might evolve into partnerships. Over time, it might evolve into mergers or acquisitions, or there's multiple different levels. But I think if you're sitting there in a boutique and you can see opportunities to collaborate with other firms, then just take that opportunity, have the conversation, and see where it'll go. Because I think that is the future, and it enables you to in a more rounded way, be able to help your clients when they're talking to you about a problem that they've got, whether you help them directly or whether you can pass them to somebody else who has suitable knowledge.
Yeah, again, it's a conversation. The worst that can happen, it goes nowhere. It's worth exploring for sure, and expanding your horizons. Deri, I want to give you a platform to talk about your work at Honeycomb. I wonder if you could tell us about some of the more transformative stories that you've been a part of, perhaps a client that you helped to deliver some of that impact you were talking about earlier. What can you share with us?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I think there's two things I'm really excited about at the moment. One is there's one client we're working with where we've really got into a partnership model, and the senior team are really deeply engaged in actually driving behavior change. So they're not in that mode of, oh, we just need a training course, we need to put the people through something for a couple of days. They're very much into, right, what's the training going to do? How are we going to drive that? What do we need to change internally? And that partnership model has been really powerful. In this case, we started off doing sales and business development training with 30 of their partners and directors, and we're already seeing incredible benefit. And I have the privilege of running coaching calls with a subset of that group a couple of times a month, and just seeing people coming into those calls saying, yeah, I tried this thing and it led to a really, really good conversation, and the proposal's much bigger than I expected it to be. And like the confidence that they're brimming with is really great to see. And we're seeing deal volumes going up and deal value going up and pace through the pipeline going up and all of that good stuff. So really enjoying working with firms in that way where they really get what's needed and they've made it a priority. The other thing I'm really excited about is our what we call our consulting skills acceleration service, but it's effectively an outsourced L&D model with access to all of our consulting skills training content. And so and this actually was a great example of client partnership over multiple years. So a client we've worked with for 4 or 5 years. I've got a really good relationship with the guy who owns the firm, to the point where we're frequently swapping WhatsApps on a Saturday night as his brain's buzzing with new ideas. And he said, can you do this? We need some help with this thing. And that snowballed over several months to a place where we're now running that service. We've built some tech backbone to it to help people understand what they need to be focusing on for their learning, what learning resources they've got access to check that people are actually doing it, to drive all of that. And so that's a real kind of deep partnership where we're having to innovate and think on our feet in multiple different ways to make it work, to drive engagement, to really have the impact that we want to have. So that's super exciting at the moment. And being in that kind of trial development stage with them, we're just learning so much from it. And hopefully that's something that we're going to be kind of rolling out more broadly to people as a proper offer in the future as well.
That sounds amazing. I want to tap into the fact that some of our listeners will be joining from various different stages in the consultancy journey. Some of those early stage, some are with established boutique consultancies. Let me ask it this way. If you had to start again from scratch tomorrow and get back in the game to where you're operating at this time in Honeycomb, how would you go about that? What would you do first?
The number one thing I would do is pick an extremely tight niche of a specific type of person and a specific problem to solve, and really focus on figuring out how to solve that and to talk about that relentlessly. And I thought I'd done that when I founded Honeycomb, and with hindsight I realized I was still way too broad with outsourced services for boutique consulting firms. I thought boutique consulting firms was tight enough, but the outsourced services bit was too broad. So I would go super, super focused and niche, and I would prioritize getting paying clients and cash flow above all else until you're starting to really get traction. And I think if you do anything else, if you try and go too generalist, too broad, you're not setting yourself up for long-term success, because you're not getting that compounding effect that I talked about earlier.
Amazing. Okay, positioning, differentiation. I didn't even have to pay you for that plug, but absolutely spot on.
Yeah, no, it's like absolutely critical. If you don't have that, and the thought experiment for people here is, if you're not focused, like, you need to be talking to people. Who are you going to talk to? What are you going to talk to them about? And by talking, I mean like when you're posting on LinkedIn, when you're running a webinar, when you're writing a paper you want someone to download from your website, when you're creating a website. Like, who are you talking to and what are you saying? And if you're too broad on that, you can't answer those questions. So if you can't answer those questions, you're too broad. So focus down, talk to a specific person. It's really easy once you've got traction and you've got a business and you hit 7 figures to then broaden out from there. But worry about that when you're at that level.
Completely agree. Yeah, it's a big mistake on LinkedIn and emails and everything. People thinking so many people are going to receive this or possibly see this message. I have to speak to everybody, and that's absolutely not the way to go. Just who is your ICP, your ideal client profile? Um, Deri, we come to the part of the call where I ask this recurring question, the whole snog, marry, avoid. So first off, in your world of consulting, what is the snog? What is the quick win that you would advocate people implement ASAP?
Yeah. So what I've got for this is one of my big things as a consultant is building trust with clients. And one of the tools we use for building trust is active listening. And the very specific quick win phrase that I think people should have in their heads is just, can you say more about that?
Yeah.
Just a way of getting people to keep talking. And actually, if you want a great example of it, watch Couples Therapy on Netflix, which is there's 4 seasons of it. It's superb. It's captivating. It takes my wife and I about an hour and a half to watch a 25-minute episode because we keep pausing it and talking about the couples. And all of the therapist on there sits very quietly a lot of the time, and then someone will say something, and then she just says, "Say more," and they talk and they say more and they keep talking.
Is this
So just the
reality
phrase,
TV, Deri?
yeah, it's like it's real couples having
Right.
real couples therapy. So it's reality TV, but it's like it's superb. I would highly recommend it. Um, and yeah, so just can you say more about that as a phrase to keep someone talking and just start to dig? We call it peeling the onion, get into the next level. And if you have that with that mindset of genuine curiosity, guarantee you that your client conversations, your conversations with your team, when you're trying to uncover what's going on, everything will be better because you're getting yourself in this mindset of really trying to understand what they're saying to you, not just thinking, how do I prove that I'm the smart consultant in the room here? That's not the mindset. The mindset is how do I get them talking?
Yeah. How do I give someone the platform? I love that. Okay, Mary, what is something that you would implement that is for the long term that you just absolutely couldn't live without in the world of consultancy?
I've got a horribly boring answer to this one.
Go on.
Horribly boring, but the thing that I keep coming back to time and again is a really tight scoping letter or an engagement letter. Really tight scope of work where you're really clear on what are you going to do, when are you going to do it by, what are you not going to do, whether that's a problem statement worksheet, one pager, whether it's a detailed legal engagement letter, whatever it is, that scoping document defines your ability to deliver the project that your client wanted to buy at the level of profitability that you've worked out you can do it for. And if you don't have that, you're going to get scope creep. You're going to get disagreements. You're not going to deliver cleanly what they wanted. I've gone back to those letters so many times to say, what did we promise, and are we keeping our promises? So it's horribly boring, but
Brilliant.
I think it's super valuable,
Yeah.
particularly for small firms where you're tempted to try and over deliver and delight every client that you work with, which might trash your profitability very quickly.
Absolutely. Get bent over the barrel, as they say. No, love that. Okay, and avoid. What would you advocate people ditch as soon as possible? What's the superfluous? What don't they need?
I don't know that they don't completely need it, but my answer for this is slides, PowerPoint. Now I'm a huge believer in PowerPoint and the power of a well designed slide, but the over reliance on it and the abuse of it is just huge for me. So going back to that building trust theme and getting people talking, as soon as you put a slide in front of somebody, you're taking a risk that you're disrupting the flow of human connection and the trust that you're building. So only ever use a slide when it's really necessary and leave the 100-page appendix as an appendix that doesn't even come out on the table until someone specifically asks about it. Get your slide decks down to 10, 15 pages at the most and focus on the conversation more than the slide deck. I
Disrupt.
remember as a Bain, what was I? Senior consultant, hadn't quite made manager.
Yeah.
Uh, I remember the manager being so stressed about a typo that he'd spotted on page 137 of a steer code deck that we'd already printed 20 copies of 5 minutes before the meeting, he was having us go through all of those decks and rip out page 137 because he was so worried about the client seeing it. The client didn't open the deck for the entire meeting because he doesn't care what's on page 137. He cares about what the recommendation is that for the decision he needs to take.
Yeah.
So ditch massive slide decks. Focus down on communication and building trust and human connection.
Yeah, I love that. The phrase disrupting the flow of human connection. Anything that does that just is not warranted, is it? Deri, thanks so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure. I could chat to you about this for many, many hours more, but thanks for joining us on the Consultancy Edge today.
Been an absolute pleasure, Matt. Thank you for having me. And yeah, been a real joy to be here. Time's flown by. Thank you.
Thank you.